Hi beautiful souls, it's Tan here again today, talking more about astrology. And today I want to tell you a little bit about, from my perspective, what I think actually happens when you learn astrology. So of course we all know that, when you learn astrology, you figure out more about yourself, you figure stuff about your unconscious and your subconscious mind, and you know how to relate better with other people and improve yourselves. But, okay, so I actually realized something while I was watching this movie called Arrival, starring Amy Adams. Not sure if you've watched it, but I want to tell you a little bit about this movie first before I make the connection with astrology. So this is a bit of a spoiler alert. If you've already watched this movie, that's great, but if you haven't watched this movie yet, then you can maybe skip this part. It's because it's gonna be a bit of a spoiler, but if you're not interested in the movie anyways, then you can continue and watch it. So in the movie Arrival, so there are these spaceships, okay? So they've landed on Earth, and Amy Adams, who plays a linguist, her name is Louise, she's been sent on a mission, okay, to communicate with the extraterrestrial creatures inside the spaceships. And so she goes in and she spends a really long time trying to decipher their language. And what she found out was that the way that we human beings, right, the way that we speak, the way that we communicate and learn language, the way our language is structured basically is in a linear fashion, okay? So we speak in a linear fashion, we write in a linear fashion. It's either from right to left, up to down, left to right. But these aliens, when she learned their language, the way they wrote to her was in a circular wheel like this. So instead of them writing from right to left, they go in a circle, okay? So what she discovered was that the way that these aliens think, okay, the way their language influences their thoughts, was that they didn't think in a linear fashion. So they were able to kind of perceive the future because of the way that their language was structured. So the main idea, then what Amy Adams set out to do next is she tries to teach people this alien language because basically their message to us was that they are going to need us within the next 3,000 years in the future. They're going to be in contact with us again in the next 3,000 years into the future, so they want humans to be able to learn their language so that human beings can stop seeing time as being a linear thing, but as seeing another dimension, so that we can see that the future is happening now, so that we can see the future. Because if we can learn this language, our brain is going to program, it's going to be functioning differently. So the main idea of this movie, I think, is that the way that language has been created is affecting our ability, our cognitive processes. So okay, so that's it with the movie, all right? So what I've been thinking is that so the purpose and the way that language in our world works is by subject, object, verb relationships, right? So we speak in terms of, I go to school, okay? So like I is the object, the school, I is the subject and school is the object, and go is like the verb. So because the language is structured this way, our cognitive processes function this way. We see the world in terms of subject and object. So this has got me thinking about astrology, because the more that I get into astrology, the more I realize that astrology is a kind of language that has to be learned, and we have to actually translate into something that we, into English to communicate with other people, right? But the language of astrology doesn't function in a subject, object, verb manner. The language of astrology functions in terms of collective archetypes. it is a psychological, it's a language of psychology, but at the same time, it talks about how our psychology, how our, collective consciousness and collective unconscious is in synchronicity with the movements of the planets and the stars. It is not necessarily that, the planets are influencing us to behave in a certain way, but it is that we are actually operating within a pattern that is in synchronicity, and it's happening at the same time with the patterns of, the celestial patterns in the universe. So astrology can really open up your eyes to seeing another dimension of the world. That's what I've, experienced with astrology, and I think a lot of people who do learn astrology experience this as well. We see the world differently. We begin to realize that, the future that we predict with astrology, when you look at your natal chart and you're like, oh, this is what's going to happen to me, in the future, you can see the future happening with astrology, pretty much like in Arrival. It's pretty creepy. Actually, when I was watching the movie, I was getting goosebumps and stuff. But anyways, yeah, so you can actually see what's going to happen with you in the future. But you realize that what you're predicting that's going to happen with you in the future is operating right now in your mind and in your body, in your consciousness, in your psychology. Because if you are not who you are right now, that future is never really going to happen. Do you know what I mean? So let me give you an example of how a couple of years ago I was predicting my Saturn return, right? Right now I'm currently going through my Saturn return, and it sucks like hell, but anyways, so I was predicting what's going to happen during my Saturn return, and now I'm experiencing it right now, and those predictions, are happening, right? But the thing is that while I was predicting that like 2 or 3 years ago, who I was at that time is the reason why that prediction of the Saturn return is happening now. So that future that I was seeing 2 to 3 years from now is me at that point in 2 to 3 years. So the future is happening to us right now. So it's not necessarily like a linear process, where like, okay, this happens and then this happens next and next and next. But it's happening together, at the same time. I hope that's kind of making sense, guys. And if you really think about it, you can probably get someone to read your natal chart for you. That's fine, like get an astrologer to read it. But what if you could read it yourself? It's like you see a book and it's like written in Russian, right? And you're with a Russian friend and you're like, could you please read this book to me? And your Russian friend will be like, yeah, sure, I'll read it to you. But what if you actually learned Russian and you read it yourself? The process of learning Russian programs your mind to think differently according to the cultural context of Russia. If you can learn to read your own natal chart, learn how to read the language of astrology to translate it, your thinking will change. Your thinking, you will perceive the world differently. You will not see that, we're just living in this time and space dimension and time is linear, but you can see that everything that's happening within our body is happening in the future already, and what's happening in the future is already happening now, and what's happening now is already in synchronicity with what's happening with the planets and the stars. And everything is in unity. And that's the beauty of astrology. Okay guys, so I guess that's all I have to say for today. I don't know, let me know in the comments below what you think about this perspective, and what have you discovered as you are studying and learning about astrology? Has your perspective on things completely changed, and how do you think that's going to be different if you had never learn to try to read your own natal chart? If you had just gone to an astrologer, how would that be different from, what you're doing right now, which is trying to learn your own natal chart, to read your own natal chart. Alright, so that's all for today, guys. Have a beautiful day. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't subscribed yet, then please hit the subscribe button below. If you've already subscribed, then thank you very much. And this is just the start of our adventures into astrology, guys. Bye.